All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday. Welcome to week 11. You may have noticed that in Teams I posted the assignment for the final paper, which you can look over. I will talk about it. Maybe I'll talk about it a little bit later today, just to so I can actually address it verbally, and if you have any questions, I can answer them. But I have posted it there, so you can look at it at your leisure. Let's see who's here. So Abby is here. Good morning, Abby. Shania is here. Good morning, Shania. Simrat is here. Good morning, Simrat. And Tushin Sana is here. Good morning. Oops, sorry. Good morning. Good morning to you. Okay, let's dive in here.
Sir,
Yes.
We're going to get our quizzes back.
You were going to get them back today, except I forgot them at home. Yes.
And you didn't even put the marks in.
I did not. I usually wait to hand them back just in case there's any mistakes, but yeah, that's my job tonight, I think. Right. So yesterday we were talking about this paper that we read, and we said that there was lots of stuff in this article, but some things I wanted you to take from it were, number one, that again, if you look at terrorism within the United States, most of it is based on white supremacism, or at least is committed by the dominant group, the white dominant group. Again, if you asked a lot of Americans what does a terrorist look like, they would imagine kind of probably a Middle Eastern guy, or a guy with a big beard, or something like that. But again, if you look at the data, that's not really who's committing terrorist acts in the United States. And again, again, whether you want to call this a terrorist act necessarily, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter. But we had a mass shooting in the United States just a few days ago, right? And there were, I think, eight young Asian women who were murdered. And again, not murdered by an Islamic terrorist or anything like that, but murdered by a white guy, right? And again, there seem to be some racial motives. There seem to be some gender-based or misogynistic motives. The picture is still coming together.
So you mean the one where the kid was knocked by in a Muslim country and then he came taking revenge in a mosque? He shot people?
No. That was good morning. This just happened a few days. What's today? Today's Tuesday. I think it happened about a week ago, and it was a young man who went into a massage parlor and shot a bunch of women. 8, I think. Yeah. And so, what's that? It's a different one. Yeah. It's so hard to keep track of mass shootings, right? Because there's a new one every week, and it's hard to keep track, unfortunately. Yeah. So again, most Americans would think of a terrorist one way, but you should think of them as a different group, right? And so we talked a little bit about white supremacists. We talked about white nationalists. We talked about people on the right and the sort of alt-right. And so, oops, I'm going to move my head here. Talked about the political spectrum here. And again, this is a useful graphic for you, whether you in other classes or in life. People will often refer to the right and the left, and left wing and right wing, and conservatives and liberals and things like that. And so this is kind of a useful, this is a useful tool. And what I said is that, for the most part, well, left wing and right wing mostly has to do with how people think society should be and what the role of government in society should be. And again, most people, like probably 90% of people, you will find pretty close to the center, right? Some people lean a little bit left, some people lean a little bit right, some people are kind of a mix. They might be socially conservative but economically liberal, or the other way around. You can be kind of a mix of both, but almost all people in sort of the US and Canada and really any G7 country, probably many countries in general, you'll find them right in the middle because people's political views generally are not that extreme. They tend to, most people just want things to stay relatively calm and they don't really want an extreme form of government. But there's always a few people around who are, intense about their political views, and you'll find them out at the edges toward fascism or toward communism. And so some of these people that we're talking about, sorry, I'm having trouble putting thoughts together today. The people that we find out on the alt-right, they're leaning pretty far right. And so they're past conservatism, they're past the Republicans, although again, the Republican Party in the US is leaning a lot further right than they used to. Good morning. They're leaning a lot further right than they used to, but these alt-right guys are out there and they're kind of a mix of, how do I describe them? They're kind of a mix of a lot of hatred, right? There's misogynistic views, there are anti-immigration views, there's white supremacist and racist views mixed in, there's some sort of like element of Christianity in there, some of them are anti-abortion, some of them are, some of them are against homosexuality, and so there's kind of just, it depends on who you ask, but it's a big mess of people who are kind of unhappy and who are lashing out at various groups, I guess is the easiest way I can describe it. Right, so, yeah, so and it's probably important it is important to distinguish between regular right-wing conservatives and the alt-right, because regular right-wing conservatives are kind of just normal people, right? And most of the time, sometimes you'll find them in rural communities, like outside of the cities. Sometimes they tend to be a little bit older people. Sometimes they tend to be slightly more religious. And they're simply conservative in that, they don't want a lot of change. They want to maintain things the way they are. They want to support the traditional way their country is. They want governments to be tough on crime. They want low taxes and not a lot of, they're not really interested in the government sticking their nose in their business all over the place. And that's kind of it, right? So most people who are a little bit right-wing or who are conservative, they're not really, they're not bad people. This is just their political stance. But people on the alt-right are a lot further out, right? And they are, they have a lot more, they hold a lot more destructive kind of ideas. And so, again, in the article we said that these alt-righters were pretty diverse and they were kind of reacting to all kinds of different things. So some of them were anti-feminism, anti-democracy, anti-immigration or multiculturalism, anti-homosexuality, and some of them are just, many of them are just straight up racists, right? And mixed in there are a certain amount of trolls, right? Internet trolls. So people who just say provocative and upsetting things simply to provoke and upset people. That's their end goal, is they just want people to be upset. And so there's all kinds of people mixed in here. It's a bit of a mess. And what's kind of happened recently is we've seen that this group of people have been more and more bold and more outspoken. And I think that Donald Trump's presidency had a lot to do with that, because a lot of the things that he said seem to be in support of what some of these people believe. And what Donald Trump actually believes is kind of a difficult thing to pin down, because he often says one thing and then says another thing later on, and so it's really tough to know what his beliefs actually are. But many people on the alt-right, many white nationalists, white supremacists, supported Trump because they felt that Trump was supporting them. they felt that Trump was coming from the same perspective as them. And again, whether or not that's true is hard to know for sure, but he certainly didn't speak out against them very much. And so, yeah, this group has become more vocal and more present, I guess, in society in the last few years. One of the things the thing we'll kind of talk about today has to do with this, which doesn't look like much. Any idea? Well, I know you know what it is, but do you know who it is?
It has to be someone who has contributed a lot to the country.
Ooh, good one. Yeah, it has to be someone who has contributed a lot to the country. Why do you say that?
Well, because it's a statue made of male.
It's a guy. It's a guy up there.
So,
Yep.
I mean, logically speaking, people wouldn't build a statue that resembles him if he didn't do anything for his country, right?
That is the most reasonable thing I've ever heard you say. Yeah. People would not build a statue unless this person was someone to be looked up to, right? To be respected and idolized. And in fact, that's what we're actually doing, right? Because statues tend to be up there, right? So we are literally looking up to this guy, whoever he is. But yeah, you're exactly right? Statues are, when we put up a statue like this, we're saying, hey, hey people, here's a hero. Look up to this hero, right? That's kind of what we're saying. Yeah, that's good. Where it is, it's in, I think it's in Charlottesville, North Carolina. I might have gotten that wrong, but I'm close. I think it's in Charlottesville, North Carolina. It is a statue of a Confederate general, and I think it's Robert E. Lee is his name. And so, again, if you know anything about the history of the United States, you know that the states went to war with each other in the sort of mid-1800s. Southern states there's a couple other issues involved, but Southern states wanted to continue to be able to keep slaves because slaves were working on their cotton and crop, or working on farms for them and making them lots of money. States in the North said, no, we don't want to do that anymore. Slavery is awful. We want to end it. And so we had these two sides go to war, right? The Northern states and the Confederacy, the Southern states. And so Robert E. Lee here was a general fighting for the South and fighting for the ability to continue to keep slaves. More on that later. So what happened? This is a couple years ago, but the issue is still bubbling, in a few places. But there was talk that they were going to take the statue down. Okay, and you can probably guess the reason why, because Scotty's clearly pointed out that we usually make statues of people who are heroes, right? Who we look up to and who we admire. But do we or should we be admiring someone who, fought against his own government so that he and his other southern states could continue to own people and could continue to make them work on his farms, right? Is this a person we should look up to? And I think most of us pretty intuitively know that it's not the person that we want to hold up as a hero anymore, right? Maybe people did in the past, but we don't really want to do that anymore. And so there was talk about taking the statue down and doing something with it. Maybe putting it in a museum, maybe just putting it in storage. No decision was made, but the town was talking about taking it down. But this talk created a lot of controversy. And so some people, as you might imagine, were very much in support of it. Personally, I would be in support of it because I don't think this is a guy that we need to idolize and put up on a pedestal, literally put on a pedestal. But again, other people disagreed. And so what you what you saw around this statue was kind of a flaring up of social and racial tension. And so you can see here that on May 13th of 2017, Richard Spencer and a bunch of his kind of white supremacist neo-Nazi friends decided they were going to have a rally around the statue. And so basically they were protesting, demonstrating against taking the statue down. You can see here about a month later, or a couple months later, sorry, the Ku Klux Klan, an organization that was created to ensure that Black Americans stayed at the bottom of society and didn't use their newfound freedoms back in 1865. They were there too, demonstrating a little bit later. And again, on August 12th, there was yet another demonstration by, the organizers called it Unite the Right. And so there were all kinds of different groups of people here, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, white nationalists, you name it. They were there demonstrating against taking down this statue. The protest itself gets pretty tense in places, and it got so tense that again, one young woman was killed, and unfortunately, I'll just warn you about it. You will see that in the video, although you won't see her run over, but you'll see the car drive by. So it's a pretty intense. It's a pretty intense scenario all around. So I have a video for you to watch and some questions for you to answer. And the video is kind of a documentary that was shot by Vice News, and Vice was kind of there on the ground during some of those protests, talking to some of these white supremacist demonstrators and protests. And so she's kind of trying to figure out why they're there, what they're doing, what their views are, what are they trying to accomplish, right? So she's kind of being a journalist, trying to figure out what people are doing, okay? And so these are the questions I'd like you to pay attention to while we watch. One of them is, what kind of ideologies are these white supremacists expressing, okay? So remember, an ideology is kind of a belief about the way the world is, or the way society is, or the way people are. What kind of things are they saying? What kind of ideologies do they oppose? Okay, so what kind of things are they against? At one point, there'll be a statement from Donald Trump, and this statement comes after the death of this young woman. So this young woman is hit by a car during the protests, and Trump makes a statement condemning violence on many sides. So why is that not the best thing he could have said? That's what I'm asking. Yeah, why is the statue the cause of so much controversy? And why do you think white supremacists see the world the way that they do? Okay, so that's a bit of a personal opinion question, but I'll ask you anyway. Okay, any questions before we dive into this documentary? I think it's about 15 minutes. It's not super long, but I think about 15 minutes. Any questions or things you want to say? Okay, so for online people, the link and the questions are in Microsoft Teams, as they usually are. So we'll watch this video and then we'll come back and talk about what we've seen, okay? So watch the video, the link is in Microsoft Teams, and we'll see you in just a little bit. Okay. Okay, so there's a lot to deal with there. But let's start kind of at the ground level. So what kind of ideas and ideologies do you hear some of these guys expressing? And there's a lot of stuff.
Like at the beginning, he said that whites are more than people, if I recall correctly.
He said whites were more than capable of anything?
I think so. I didn't hear the
Okay.
last word.
Okay. What else did we hear? Maybe we'll fill in some pieces here. What other ideologies were they kind of expressing? Yeah. So that's the he's not the current head of the KKK, but he was for a long time. So David Duke expressed some sort of ethno-cleansing. Was he talking, who and what do you think he was talking about? I think he was. I think he either feared or felt that he was in the middle of, an ethnic cleansing of white people from the United States, right? What else did we hear? What else did they express? Obviously, lots of racism, right? Tons and tons and tons of racism. What else did we hear? Or let's just let's do both of those questions at the same time. So what kind of ideologies did we hear about, even whether people were opposing them or supporting them? Abby says here they were seeing their rivals as animals, right? That's very true, and it's also very concerning, because usually you see that kind of in the first stages of a genocide. You'll see that one side will dehumanize the other. They'll try to make them less than, and so that's what you see. You see one side describing another side as animals or vermin or pests or some sort of subhuman kind of thing. So that's pretty upsetting. But yeah, Abby, you're right. That was in there. What other ideologies did we hear about? Who did that guy say he got maced by? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so communism is mixed in here somehow. What else do we hear about? Did you catch anything else? What's that? Yeah, not so much an ideology, but kind of, well, I don't know, maybe it's an ideology. A lot of, man, those guys were armed, hey? Shields and helmets and Kevlar vests and guns and knives, and holy cow, you'd think they were going to war. What else did we see? Yeah, clearly not a lot of concern for. I think it's part of the dehumanization thing, right? They're very polarized, and so there's not a lot of concern for people on the other side, right? What else did you hear, especially from that whoever the shaved head guy we heard from all the time? I forget his name. What else did we hear from him? Sophie, do you want to?
He was just saying a lot
Yeah, it was. Did you find it kind of hard to figure out what the heck he was talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think that was? It's not you.
Yeah. I feel like they're just really into this big idea of like themselves as a group. They don't even see the other people as like human, they see them as animals.
They do. Yeah. They see their rivals as subhuman or less than human or animals, and yeah, they're really into their own ideas, right? To the point where, did you get the sense that even though I'm sure he thinks about this stuff 24/7, he still seemed to have a lot of trouble explaining some of his ideas, right? And I think that's maybe what you're picking up on, Sophie, is that like you could hear him talk, but he would get to the end of his little statement, and you're like, what are you talking about, right? Like, what are you trying to say? Yeah. Well, did anyone else kind of sense that from him?
They say
Or-
when you don't have a point, you start saying a lot of things and don't connect.
And they do say that, but do you say that about him? Yeah, it's true, right? And they do have a lot of points that don't really connect. I found he contradicted himself a lot. Did you see that? He would go on to say, "Oh, we're nonviolent," but in the very next sentence, he's talking about killing people if he has to, right? And he just wants to sort of have an open exchange of ideas, except, you don't need 4 guns on you to exchange your ideas, right? So there's a lot of kind of contradictions happening where he says one thing and then he will come back at you with the exact opposite in the next sentence, and so it's hard to know what's going on with him, right?
Is it because like he's trying to defend himself? Because like I think near the end of the video he said that he'll be expecting a lot of resistance from the other side.
Well, yeah, I think most of, I would like to think that most of American society would resist his ideas, or at least most of the Western world would. I mean, I don't believe that most of the United States wants, a purely white nation with either subjugated or removed peoples of color. Like I don't think most Americans want that. Yeah, and I think most people would resist those ideas. But there's a lot of conflicting, confusing rhetoric, right? And again, one of the problems is that everything is kind of mixed in together, and it's almost the same thing it's almost with the alt-right, where it's like there's misogyny and there's anti-abortion and there's racism and there's a reaction against homosexuality and different genders and things like that. Everything is kind of lumped in together, and it's a confusing mix. And you hear it, even in what they're talking about. Suddenly, they're talking about protesting, and they seem to be, it seems to be a race thing. But then the next thing, it's Bolshevism, or it's communism, or it's, a Jewish conspiracy, or the state is being run by a Jewish conspiracy, and these things kind of, again, they're all kind of old racial, ethnic, religious stereotypes that have been used at one point in history or the other, and they're just all kind of like tied up and mashed together in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? These kind of old prejudices are kind of recycled and just kind of stuck together into this worldview that these guys have, right? It's a bit of a mess. Why do you think Trump's statement about condemning violence on many sides was problematic? Do you think that was the best thing he could have said as President of the United States? Okay, we're going to do that. Okay. time for break, people. So take a break, take 10, come back, finish talking about this, okay? Okay, people, and we're back. So, as you can hear, we read that article and we saw that there's a lot of different ideas and ideologies mixed into this sort of alt-right white supremacy thing, and you kind of hear that in the video, right? There's a lot of kind of confusing mix of racism and misogyny and sort of leftover fears from the Cold War, sort of citing communists and Bolsheviks and things like that. It's kind of a confusing mess of ideologies that these guys are using. And in some cases, they're kind of almost contradicting each other. They're almost contradicting each other in the same sentence, right? And so it's just kind of a mess of stuff that falls under this kind of white supremacy sort of umbrella. What's wrong with Donald Trump's statement? What would you say? Okay. So the two sides of the rally were we have the white supremacists, and who was on the other side? Yeah, and what were they? What was the left protesting, or what were they? Why were they there? Yeah, in a way, right? They were there as kind of a counter protest. So the white supremacists were there protesting, for their rights or whatever, and didn't want the statue taken down. And the other protesters were there counter protesting the white supremacists. Yeah.
What would the white supremacists fight?
They are, well, that's a good question. What are they fighting for? What are they fighting for? What's that? Well, they definitely had their chance to shoot people. Unfortunately, none of them did. But what are they fighting for? Yeah, I guess in a way they're fighting for all of those things that we read about in the article from a couple days ago, right? That they are trying to protect their race that they see as under threat. They're trying to argue for or create a country in which white people are in power or in charge, or maybe white people are the only people in the United States. They're sort of arguing or pushing or demonstrating for that.
So they're fighting for a world that already exists.
Well, it depends on how you look at that world, but they want a more extreme version of that world. So, I think that most of those guys probably don't see a place for non-white people in the United States, or if so, only at kind of the lowest level of society, I think. Did we get an answer to that then? What was the problem with his statement? Yeah, he didn't specifically condemn one side or the other. He also didn't mention the young woman who died as a result of her injuries in that car accident, right? Abby says here, they saw violence as a solution, and he allowed for that violence to happen. Yeah, the journalist did mention that, right? She said that, you know, things he has said in the media has sort of, you know, aligned with or seemed to have supported these white supremacists, and here someone has died as a result, and you know, and he cannot condemn them, right? He cannot say, look, you guys, you were in the wrong, you know, you shouldn't have been there, you shouldn't have done what you did, now this woman is dead, I don't support you, stop this right now, right? That seems to be the obvious thing for a president to say, but for some reason he wasn't able to say it, right? What do you think? How did this thing get so heated and kind of boil over, right? We're talking about a statue, aren't we? It's not even that nice of a statue in my personal opinion, but why was there so much controversy and anger about this?
That is the statue that we actually
It, indeed it is.
and he said that it's there in season for the slavery action.
Why it's there is a slightly different answer, but that's who he is, or who he was, yes.
Who was he?
Who was he?
Because if he's taking action for the slavery,
Uh-huh.
then that may be the reason why it causes so much controversy, because that is the symbolic of slavery.
Yeah, in some ways he does symbolize that era of history, right? So he's a Confederate general. He fought for the South, and the Southern states wanted to continue to keep their slaves. Of course, the South lost, but still, Robert E. Lee is apparently put up on a pedestal as some kind of hero, right? And again, what message does that transmit to society, to people who live in Charlottesville? What message does that really transmit to them? Say again? Yeah, and what specific values are those? Yeah, there's okay to own slaves, or maybe a little more generally. Yeah, it's still it transmits the message that what those guys were fighting for was right? That it was okay to fight in order to continue to be able to own human beings, and specifically human beings based on their race, right? Based on the color of their skin. That's okay, right? He's still a hero to us. We still look up to this guy who fought for that reason, right? That's the message that still gets transmitted. And again, how does that feel? How does that feel if you're a black person living in Charlottesville today, right? And we heard how it felt, right? That the young woman at the sort of candlelit vigil the next day, she said how it felt, right? What did she say? Do you remember? They were kind of in the park and they were lighting candles and. Hmm? okay. She, yeah, she kind of expressed her feelings about that, right? She says like, this is Charlottesville, right? I think she said that, she said something to the effect of, you know, the master's still looking down on us, right? Like he's still the plantation owner, and we're still, you know, he's looking at us like his slaves, right? There he is, still there, right? Held up, supported by society, and, you know, he's looking down on us, right? Specifically us Black Americans. And again, what does it mean when your city continues to put that statue there and leave it sitting there, right? What message does it transmit? It's also interesting to think about the other side of this argument, and they didn't talk about it very much in the video, but the other side is that, oh well, we can't take it down because it's history, right? Taking down this statue, that'd be like erasing our history. You can't erase history. That's why the statue's there. Everybody just calm down. That's kind of the other side of that argument. But what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that argument? How so? Right. Whether a statue stands or not does not change history, right? So there are no statues of Adolf Hitler in Germany anywhere, and whether there are or aren't, it doesn't change the fact that he is an important part of the history of Germany. Whether you like it or whether you don't, he's an important historical figure for Germany and for the world, arguably. But whether there's a statue of him or not doesn't change that. And again, there are no statues of him, and he's a huge historical figure. Yeah, so it's not true. The other thing that's interesting about the statues is when they're erected, right? So here we have a Civil War general, statues erected. Do you have any idea how old that statue is? Or do you want to, well, you probably don't know, but do you want to make a guess when it was erected?
Is it 1960s?
Why would you say that?
If I recall correctly, the fourth leader of the U.S. led the war led the Civil War in the North. If I recall, we done something out 1960s or something.
I think you might be thinking of the 1860s, because
Oh, 18?
the Civil War takes place in the sort of mid 1800s.
Oh, so
Yeah.
it's
Right. So you would imagine that toward the, at the end of the war, the war is over, the South loses, but then they erect these statues to sort of honor their brave generals. That makes sense, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it does make sense, and often that's what you see, right? Is at the end of the war, people commemorate it, or sometimes on anniversaries of the end of the war, that kind of thing. But the interesting thing is that a lot of the statues of Confederate generals in the United States, they show up in, actually, that you accidentally said, they show up in around the mid-60s. And if you know your American history, you'll know that the mid-60s was the Civil Rights Movement, was Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and the desegregation of schools. All of those things are happening in the United States at the time, and so people are pushing for, African Americans are pushing for and winning, a better degree of equality in the United States in the mid-60s. And so it's very interesting that during that time that Black Americans are able to take steps forward toward equality and that the South is erecting statues of Confederate generals. Don't you find that interesting timing? Yeah, it's very interesting, right? So again, when Black Americans are able to take steps forward, you know, you'll see the resistance show up, right? You'll see the KKK show up, right? And here, when we have, you know, a large Black Lives Matter movement happening, when we have people actually having a conversation about taking some of these monuments down because they are awful for Black Americans to look at every day, when you start having that conversation, who shows up? But all of the white supremacists, right? They sort of appear almost out of nowhere. And that happens. You'll see that happen in periods where Black Americans are kind of more present, or they're gaining rights, or they're gaining more power. People will appear to push back, right? And that's exactly what's happening here. But again, the statues are interesting because they're not put up at the end of the Civil War like you might expect. That would be a normal thing. But they're put up at a time when Black Americans are gaining more political and social power in the United States. And so it's almost as if the statue goes up as a little reminder that, hey, you know, don't forget that we're still in charge here, right? Don't forget that white America is still in charge, which is gross. But I have one more question for you, but I think I'll leave it until tomorrow. Tomorrow I will talk about the final paper. Again, I mentioned earlier that I posted it in my, Microsoft Teams, but I'll speak to it a little bit more tomorrow just to answer some questions. But for today, I will end it here. Have a nice afternoon, and I'll see you tomorrow, or in 20 minutes. Yeah. Left him at home. I'll bring him tomorrow. Okay.
So when